Okay. Album number 3. I get the first take on this one.
Yeah.
Let's let Matt go ahead and give the numbers, and then I'll give a little bit of a bio.
So this is the Young Gods Low Rouge. It comes in at number 784 in best ever albums in the 1980s, number 76 in 1989, number 5,209 of all time. It is the Young Gods' highest rated album on best ever albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and the Young Gods are ranked at number 2,414 of overall artist rankings on best ever albums.
Gotcha. So we're going to continue with another artist with an interesting bio, and it's a shame we didn't do the B-52s because they have an interesting bio as well. So pretty much everybody this week has a very interesting bio. So I want to give a little bit of a piece of what's going on. Once again, credit for those that might be listening to All Music for a quick one, and the Young Gods bio. What you want to, they're described as electro noise terrorists, is the self-described and critically given sort of sampler for what they are. You see that mentioned a lot in terms of how they're described. They are sort of the brainchild of a Swiss-based frontman, Franz Treichler. He's in a new wave band, which seems to be something that is a common theme for folks that go into like industrial. That was also the Trent Reznor lane. Remember last week that he was new wave and then ended up in industrial? So I don't know what it is about new wave that drives people to go into electronic or industrial or sort of harsher music, but he was there. Kind of got bored with it and started messing around with the sampler. He was also inspired by punk a little bit. And classical music, the scale of classical music and sort of soundscapes in that way. And so his goal was to kind of sort of combine all of these things together. So it was like, let me take loops, let me take samples, let me get noise rock guitar, let me bring in different song structures, and let's go ahead and make a band. So he found a percussionist, Frank Bogno. I think the Bagno, Bagnoud. I think it's Bagno would be the pronunciation. I apologize if I got that wrong. And a person who is credited as a sampler, Cesare Pizzi, as well. And the band was formed in 1985. The band is named after a song from Swans, the group Swans, who we have not covered, but is a band that comes up quite a bit in the noise rock and avant-garde bios that I've done. I'm actually kind of shocked we never did a Swans album. Probably that's an omission that we can look to remedy later or something like that. But they, yeah, it's a song by them and Young Gods, and then they produce a single that was sort of described by almost everyone as, like, I read one description of it that described the sound of their single as assaultive, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And then they have a self-debuted LP in 1987. The album is very well regarded by the British press. It's actually named the Album of the Year by Melody Maker. And then this is their follow-up from 1989. And by this time, Bagno is gone, and the new drummer is Use or Use, if you see it pronounced. Spelling is U-S-E, like use in the States. Highstand is the name of the new drummer who is playing on this album. So that kind of takes you a little bit into the leading up to it. As you might know, this is somewhat of a loose concept album. It's sort of about dancing with the daughter of death a little bit. So the sound is supposed to sort of, there's songs that are, Red Water, about the female period, and Les Enfants about childhood, and Charlotte is sort of designed to sort of take on like what a cabaret sound would sound like. So they're veering all over. And maybe that's a good time for me to start to bounce into what this sounds like. This was a really interesting one, guys. And I still don't quite know if I can give a full review of this yet, because I listened to it twice, but I do feel like I need to let it sit in a little bit more. And I also think this is an album that, as we get into the 90s and more electronic music and see the scope of things, I'll be able to put this a little bit more in, I guess, in its correct place. there are some elements of this that remind me a little bit about what Trent Reznor was doing in Pretty Hate Machine, right? So they're operating a little bit of the same lane. There's definitely a lot of the avant-garde noise rock that we've listened to. There's a
Mm-hmm.
direct overlap with like Pear Ubu and some of the bands that were, as we said, more assault, like Birthday Party, right, is another one that comes to mind
Yes.
that's like that. And then there's stuff that sounds a little bit like what comes in the midnight. At times, you could mistake this for like a Rammstein or a Prodigy album, at different parts. I was like, oh, this sounds sort of like that type of industrial, right? Like mainstream. And then there's this cinematic aspect to it. Some of it, I think, is because I always notice, in my pop music when someone is not singing in English. It's still enough of a novelty that I pay attention. And I enjoyed the voice. It sort of scored the compositions appealingly for me. I just think as I was listening to this, it grew on me more and more as we went along. I was laughing because I'm like, I don't see a scenario where either Josh or Matt are going to like this album because it sounds a lot like other stuff that I was open to that usually were more closed doors for both of you, but I'm open to be surprised by that. But I would have said thumbs in the middle after the first listen, which I knew you couldn't listen to this album only once. I had to listen to it a couple times. The second listen, I would start to move it to slight thumbs up, and I reserve judgment to move it further up. It sounds like a lot of stuff we've covered and will cover, yet at the same time has its own distinct identity, which is a compliment to this album. I might have other thoughts, but I think they might be best played in reacting to what you guys are saying. So I want to kind of give the floor to you guys.
Yeah, this was this was a tricky one. It was that I can't remember the last time we listened to an album or an artist that was the lyrics were in a foreign language. It's been a while, and I don't know, Rouge Mutantes or Serge Gainsbourg, was he in French? I can't even remember. But
yeah, I mean, we've done other albums, but
Yeah.
those come to mind. But we've
Yeah.
done other ones where people were not speaking, like the
Yeah.
Beats of Soweto and
Oh, sure,
stuff
sure.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah, good call. So anyway, this is assaultive is a good word. I didn't find, I guess, because we've listened to so much. Well, not so much. We've listened to a representative sample of metal at this point that I feel like this is a combination of industrial, Nine Inch Nails-esque music coupled with kind of the vocal delivery of a metal band. And it is interesting how kind of like aggressive the lyrics are coupled with the kind of score-like nature of the music. That's an interesting dichotomy. Listening to this album,
they sound like Ministry a little bit too, who we haven't covered, which is sort of like metal meets industrial and sort of the first lane of that. So I do want to use that as another reference point for those that might know it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Ministry, but they definitely do hammer kind of the no pun intended, kind of like the more like machine like aspect to some of this. I did pick up on the cabaret style musings in Charlotte. They are also interesting because they go from sometimes like really aggressive to kind of really laid back and more gentle. Sometimes from track to track, sometimes within the same song. They
Can I add one more thing, Josh? I just thought of. They're a little bit new metal adjacent too, when I think about it. Like some of the stuff that was pounding that sound in like the late '90s. So
yeah,
I'll throw that out too. Yeah.
I didn't really pick up that this time listening, but Charlotte, for example, is the cabaret one I mentioned too. Kind of sounds like an industrial Tom Waits song in terms of like its feel. There's driving guitars on a song like I guess it's Long Route, pronounced Long Route, and which is the 5th track. And then You know, they have it's got this. It's not only industrial and kind of like metal and its aggressiveness, but it's got this orchestral feel to it, especially in a song like Les Enfants, so it is kind of this interesting melding of different things. It's definitely not going to be for everyone. I found it interesting. It's definitely not a thumbs down. I felt going into it, I was kind of more than prepared for something like this, and I didn't find it as kind of abstract and
do you find like there's certain albums that like when we get them early we're down on them, and then the more we get used to it you kind of wish we could go back? And I felt that way about certain albums that we panned at the time. I'm like, I wonder if I went back and listened to this now having heard it, I'd be much higher on it.
I feel like for me, when we're faced with something like this, if there's a musical element to it that's not as kind of avant-garde, I'm more open to listening to it, or I'm able to get on the wavelength of it, especially if it's something kind of that feels like more of a music score, or maybe something that's like classical and it's a composition in terms of a wide array of instruments or sounds. And I feel like this album kind of falls into that. I didn't do any sort of translation of the lyrics, so it's really more music for this album. For me, it's a very interesting album. I only listened to it once, and it's not like academic in terms of, I don't know, I just found it more approachable and kind of interesting than some of the other more out there avant-garde music that we've listened to. So it's a thumbs in the middle. I think maybe the fact that ultimately that it's got the orchestral music and that I've liked most of the metal we listened to, and it's kind of a marrying of those two along with a dash of Nine Inch Nails, although not as kind of like definitely not like synth based dance track like Pretty Hate Machine was, but in terms of the industrial nature of it. So it definitely interesting thing that I did not know anything about this band. So thumbs in the middle for me.
Yeah. Surprisingly, I did not hate this record. I actually kind of liked it. I mean, I think you guys hit a lot of the terms. It's certainly industrial. It's kind of like, it starts with like a demented circus kind of. Yes. Like that's, I thought of Josh.
It is very much like
yeah.
Yes.
So you got this calliope sound with, yeah, you expect like some creepy clown or something to come out or whatever.
It's like in Batman Returns when the circus comes out with the penguins and all the clowns and stuff.
Yeah. Yes. So and it's not the first time we've heard something like that, but it definitely stood out to me. It's like, okay, but it is an interesting record, and I only listened to it twice as well. And this album demands more listens than that. And yeah, it's like classical. It's like not just classical music. I mean, that's kind of like an umbrella term that you'll throw around once you start hearing violins and whatever. Right. But it's an intense, like I think one of you guys said it's cinematic, but it's not. It's a specific type of cinematic. It's like when you're running away from something terrifying or whatever. That it's like this really high intensity scene that's happening. Mm-hmm. And it evokes like an unsettling feeling within you, coupled with the vocals of this guy, which is just this guttural, deep. It's not a yell. I don't know how you would describe it, but he's clearly not singing, and he's got this rough, gruff, deep sounding voice that's demented as well. It's kind of like this, it's monstrous kind of voice that he's got, which ordinarily might be something that would be off-putting to me. And he's also speaking in French, which is like one of the smoothest languages you're going to find. So it's kind of interesting to have that juxtaposed against the vocals that he's got. But yeah, it's industrial. There's some driving like guitar, sounds. What is it? Lounge Root starts with this really great guitar riff in the beginning. It's kind of like this, it's almost like thrash metal guitar that they're just really fast chugging guitar that's happening. But the the effects that they're using certainly evoke a more industrial feeling. This is not a comfortable record to listen to, but it's an interesting one to listen to. This was a headset album. From as soon as I first started hearing this, I'm like, all right, I gotta try to do the John thing here and put the headset
Agreed.
on and like
Yep,
listen
agreed, for
listen
sure.
to intently, because and once you do that, you can kind of hear, and like Pretty Hate Machine that we covered last week, it surprises you with just inserting this sound or this noise or this drum sound, like whatever, and it's just like, whoa, where'd that come from? So keeps you on your toes for sure. But so
Matt, are
ordinarily,
you embracing the if I hear a challenging album, I'm going to put headphones on as a strategy? Because I think that's a sound one.
Potentially, I think, but and it's interesting because you did mention a bunch of bands that I didn't like The Birthday Party or like Perubu. Also,
Public Image Limited's another one that came to mind.
yeah, that one I didn't hate as much. I think I was higher on that than you guys were.
I strongly disliked that album when I listened, but once again, I feel like it was because it was the first, and I almost want to go back and listen to it, having heard all kinds of other stuff and been more high on some of it as we've gone along. So yeah.
But other ones that really stood out as being abrasive and difficult for me, Suicide is in there, as well as the Pop Group. That was another one that was clearly. But I also liked This Heat. That was an album that I kind of liked as well. So I think it depends. I don't know. It's hard for me to describe why this one was more appealing. Did it hit me at the right time? I don't know. Did we, just coming off of listening to Nine Inch Nails and I was already primed for more industrial,
or do you think it's just
stuff?
You've listened to enough now, so you have a context for it?
I could still see myself going back to those other records and hating those. But I feel like 2 times is not nearly enough to give this album a fair shake. I think that there's enough interesting things happening here to get me to go back. I think I totally agree, Josh. I heard Charlotte. I'm like, that's Tom Waits. That's like demented Tom Waits, which is saying something, because that's just demented in and of itself. But really interesting record, and not for everybody. This is a little bit of homework, but for me, this is the type of homework that for whatever reason I'm picking up on some things that I liked, that I was intrigued by. So that's homework that I could probably be okay sitting down and taking from time to time. So it's hard to grade this, right? It's definitely no worse than a thumbs in the middle, but I'm going to say I'm kind of with you, John. I like that. It's some slightly up, and I reserve the right to increase or decrease, I suppose, the thumb with the direction that the thumb goes in. But I think there's enough in here for me to still give it a slight thumbs up and to say, all right, this is worth going back and giving more attention to.
Yeah. If I had to make a cinematic equivalent to this album, like a French director, Gaspar Noé, does a lot of films that are like very kind of, at least the ones I've seen, are like very assaultive and aggressive and challenging, and I feel like this is of a piece with those types of films.
Yeah, those are all good. Yeah. Cacophonous was another word that came to I had written down. It's like, it's just but yeah, assaultive is just like, man, let's do it. You're gonna get right into it and get the full brunt of it right away. So interesting